Thank you very much for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here with you to share some insights from my experience and my learning from my mistakes. That's the way this talk has been known. These are my conflict of interest. And let me start with a short bio. I was born and raised in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. I went there to school, to medical school. I did my residence there at a large pediatric hospital. I did my pediatric hemato-oncology fellow there. I did my PhD there. And I worked there for about 30 years as a pediatric oncologist. Then I also had appointments as a contractor at St. Jude, which is now the Global Alliance, and I am also associated to San Juan de Déu Hospital in Barcelona, and my current position is a scientific director of the Pérez Cremini Foundation at Montevideo, Uruguay. My major interests are in retinoblastoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, neuroblastoma, histiocytosis, and I am now the continental president for Latin America of SIOP, and currently also the SIOP president-elect. I am married to an MD PhD as well, and I have two daughters who are, one of them is an MD and the other one is a professional in food technology. So before starting, you will see this slide many times during my talk. And so you see here that I also say that it is not a straight line to success. Here it is a search in PubMed about my publications from 1994 to the present time. So you could see here that they were reflected in my papers, that they were back and forth, times where I was very active, times when I thought I was going up, times when I was going down. But I'm happy to say that, fortunately, probably that's going to say the same for you when you reach my age, that finally the line is upwards. But I will share with you the many back and forths of this story. So how did I start it in the pediatric oncology research? I started by reading a lot. I have to say that I was always a passionate reader in medical school and everywhere else. And I was not determined to be a pediatric oncologist when I started my pediatric residency. In fact, I was going to be an infectious disease specialist. I have been teaching microbiology. I really liked infectious diseases. But it was this thing that really changed my life, meeting key people. And I'm going to talk about these key people later in the talk, but that was really the determinant in my life. Meeting key people who could motivate you, who could make you feel interested in different topics, who wants you to progress and teach you how to do it. I think it was the key. And that's what I found in pediatric oncology at the hospital where I was doing my training. And that's why probably I didn't become an infectious disease. They were great guys, but I was really impressed by the people that I met when I was during my residence in pediatrics at my hospital. Also, that is not such a conscious decision, but I decided to spend long time working. I was a very good student. I spent a lot of time reading and studying, so it was kind of natural that I would spend a lot of time working. And also, I think that is important. I was determined to solve problems. I didn't like things that were not completed or finished. I wanted to solve those problems, and I will go back later in my talk. And that's interesting because I knew key issues for that time. It was the late 80s, early 90s. I spoke English, which in a Spanish-speaking country was, there were some of my colleagues spoke English, but I was quite good in speaking English, so that was a really good advantage in my career. And I knew some basic biostatistics and some computing for that time. Remember, Excel didn't exist at that time. So I learned the basic probably because of my brother, who was a technologist, a professional in computers, probably one of the first ones in the country. So that was really key in my career. And I was determined to go further. And I was determined to look beyond the world. I always like to see beyond the world. So I wanted to go abroad to a major center and come back and apply what I learned there in these referral centers. So this is probably, I mentioned already, this is probably one of the most important things that happened in my career life, to meet these three great mentors, Dr. Abramson in Argentina, in New York City when I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering at the last time of my fellowship, Dr. Schwartzman in Argentina, who introduced me to the world of retinoblastoma with such a generosity that I will never forget, and Dr. Sackman, who unfortunately passed away this year. He was the head of the Pediatric Oncology department when I joined there, and was my chief for a long time, and my friend until his last moments this year. And I think this is quite more common in research than in medical profession right now. I think we're losing somehow these mentors, the relationship with the mentors, these great people that wants you to become better, want you to be better than them. You'll probably never achieve that. And they are generous. They are part of your family. My daughter is called Dr. Abramson Uncle David, because we went with him many times when we were younger. That is what a real mentor is. And we are losing that, unfortunately, in the medical field. So when I started, I can realize now about this. What was it? Was it curiosity, or was the opportunity? What is that drives the topic where you do your research? I think both. You have to be flexible very early, and later too, perhaps in the lesser degree, but in your career, you have to be flexible. I was not born interested in retinoblastoma. Really, in fact, I was not good at genetics, and genomics was not my strong part. But that was an opportunity there. There was that great guy, that great guy, Dr. Schwartzman, that once wanted me to teach me everything he knew. There were a lot of patients in my hospital, lots to do. I told you, I like to solve problems. The patients were there, the protocol was there. I wanted to have that protocol analyzed and learn from that experience. That was really something that changed the way I faced the topics that I would later become an expert in. But also curiosity is really important. If you're not curious, if you're not, I will also say not only curious, but also you have not to trust on the truth. You have to always question the truth. It is important that you don't take everything for granted. If you don't have curiosity, and if you take everything for granted, there is no chance that you will enjoy research. Enjoying research is defying what is known. Even when you defy yourself, perhaps sometimes you made some research, and then there's another research that will tell you that what you were doing was wrong. But if you don't have that attitude, which is part of curiosity, part of insatisfaction, I think if you don't have that, research is going to be a hard time for you. Also, it's very important, at least for me, when I came back from the US early in my career, I think we in the countries where I live in Argentina, we wanted to try to fit our results to be similar to other ones, to what other ones found. For example, if I was treating retinoblastoma patients, I just wanted my survival curve being exactly the same as in Memorial or as in St. Jude or the great centers in the world. And if it was not, I would say, well, maybe it's a problem with statistics, maybe it's a problem from my population is smaller. But later in time, and that I learned a lot from other mentors that I also had, like Dr. Ribeiro and Dr. Carlos Rodriguez Galindo in St. Jude, that the difference is more important than the similarities. Why our results were not the same as in big centers was the key. It's not like they were sweeping under the carpet. I wanted to check at those differences, which were the problems, or how could we improve our results. I think that is really critical. We all want to be the best students and show the world that we can do it exactly the same as in big centers. Sometimes we can, of course, but when we can't, I think it's more important to check the differences. And also there are a lot of topics, but you can do one tumor, you can do another one, but it is important that you focus. Perhaps I focused too much very early in my career. I focused mostly in retinoblastoma, and later I had to open to other tumors, but you have to be focused, I think. Also, you have to consider where you're working, because if I was working in a center with no cases of retinoblastoma, even though I could become interested, even though I could meet Dr. Abramson, I could not practice, I could not see children, I could not produce results. So the things that you have in your hospital, you have to take that into account. So again, the opportunity against the curiosity. So let me tell you, this was my first pediatric oncology paper. In fact, my first paper was about fever of unknown origin in the Journal of Infectious Diseases. So I wanted to be a pediatric infectious disease specialist. But this was my first paper. I went to New York. As I told you, I like to solve problems. So my head, Dr. Schwartzman, that I mentioned, he had this protocol, 116 patients, a lot for retinoblastoma, but he didn't have the chance, didn't have the tools to analyze the data. So that's what I did. I learned, I knew English, and I learned computers. So I took many months that time. I even did my Kaplan-Meier curves myself manually at those days. So I learned a lot about the very deep how the results were analyzed. And I did all that. I analyzed the study, I wrote the abstract, and I went to New York trying to meet Dr. Abramson, who still is my mentor and probably the person that knows most about retinoblastoma, having a lot of questions to him. And I was really surprised about his answer, because, you know, the patients that we see in Argentina were different to the ones that they saw in New York, because patients are presented with more advanced disease. We have different problems. And again, I tried to make it fit to what he knew. And he told me one thing that changed my life. He said, I don't have any answer to your questions, but believe me, I will teach you how to answer those questions. And that is what he did. And that, I think, is the greatest advice I got in my life, trying to make myself, or in my group, becoming aware of what our particular problems were, trying to find the solutions, and be confident in our results, and move from one study to the other based on our own experience. And that was the greatest advice I got in my career life. And interestingly, this paper, as you see, ended up in Journal of Clinical Oncology. So when I went back to New York, I wrote the paper. I learned to write the paper with him and Dr. Abram and Dr. Schwartzman. And those were the days before internet. Dr. Schwartzman was not convinced that the paper was going to be published in JCO. But I pushed and I sent the paper. Those days, again, there was no internet. You have to send 5 specimens in like an envelope like this, and wait for the regular mail to come with the answer. And the answer from the reviewer said, your paper is not acceptable. So Dr. Schwarzman threw away the letter in the garbage. So he told me that. I was so sad that I took the letter from the garbage, and the letter said, the paper is not acceptable in this form, but if you agree to do some changes, we will be pleased to analyze a revision. And the paper came. So also perseverance, as I always say, and is very, very important. And this paper became a classic back in 1996. I go back to my curve of publications, and I can show you which one time of a very first big decision in my career. I was relatively young. I had a wife who was also working in the academics. We didn't get too much money for a salary. We had 2 children. We had to send them to school. So I was appointed at the bone marrow transplantation unit. That was the appointment I got. And it took a long time, you know. It had to be on duty on Saturdays. I was not paying attention too much to retinoblastoma because I was very busy. And I had a colleague who helped me, and we worked together. But came the time that she left the hospital, and I had to decide what I was going to do. Am I going to pursue what I'm interested in, which is retinoblastoma, which I already had some papers, already knew some people. I had a great mentor in the US, and Dr. Schwartzman had already retired. So he retired and he gave me his clinic. So, and then I decided to leave that job. It was at the same hospital, but as soon as a position became available in the solid tumors, I changed there, and I went there and decided to go very deep in the retinoblastoma topic, and I did everything I could at that time. It was a difficult decision, as you can imagine. You see here that my production was inconstant. There were good years, bad years, very, very bad years. So I decided that time that I will pursue what I was interested in, which was retinoblastoma. So I did that. And new mentors came along. And these are also 2 great people that initiated me in the area of research. One of them is a pharmacist, Gabriel Mato. We were having a coffee, many coffees that we had in our lives with him. And the other one is a pathologist, is Betty Davila. She was the head of pathology at my hospital and my director in my PhD. So I decided to do my PhD. I decided to go on to the research area. I went back to New York. I spent a few months with Dr. Egronson, learning and changing my vision to try to become not only a guy that saw many patients and could do interesting studies, but also to be able to set up a lab for research in retinoblastoma. And these 2 people were really critical. They taught me how to become someone interested in, and I could say a researcher, not only a clinical pediatric oncologist. So at that time also, I had a great support from my institution where I worked. Because the institution wanted to go in that direction. So I was in the same way as my institution was. And so at that time, those years, it took years. Some researchers were recruited, like Paula Shekevich from which joined our group. We were able to set up a lab, an ocular pharmacology lab run by her, a molecular pathology lab run by Dr. Davila, and other researchers that came along. We had doctoral students coming. We applied for research grants. We grew a lot in translational research. We had also someone who is now at Santander, they're working with me as a postdoc from Spain. We really did, that time, our work exploded in productivity and people and funding. To become like this was the last picture we took. This group was all people working on retinoblastoma in 2019. That was at the end of 19 before the pandemics. They were ophthalmologists, pathologists, interventional radiologists, geneticists, nurses, anesthesiologists, secretaries, biologists, bioinformaticians, pharmacists. I think probably all the disciplines were gathered there. We went global after that. We had a lot of support from SIOP, from St. Jude. We work at the cooperative group of Gallup with the COG and other researchers and partners and grants later with Institut Curie in France. A lot of opportunities came because we had a lot of patients. We had a great lab. We have a very dedicated team and a very focused work, and we concentrate all the patients in the country. So we could produce clinical and preclinical and basic research on retinoblastoma. This is like a summary of our work. You can see here in the left column the protocols. The HPG1 was the first one that I showed you in JCO. Then we did a second one published in Cancer, a third one in Pediatric Blood and Cancer. Then we moved to, those were institutional protocols, and then we moved in the 2009 to a regional protocol like Gallup, and now we are in the second Gallup study that was published in JAMA. This is the way we're treating patients. Here, I can say this is probably what I learned a lot from it was not a mistake. Fortunately, I avoided making a mistake. We were studying very deeply periocular chemotherapy. We were able to do the first phase 1 study in periocular chemotherapy in retinoblastoma. We did a preclinical work. We went to the clinic. Something was very difficult in a middle-income country like Argentina. And then when we were about to scale to the phase 2, involving centers even in Europe for that study, my mentor, Dr. Abramson, proposed a treatment which was ophthalmic artery chemotherapy, intraarterial chemotherapy, which was much, much better, which much more effective. We didn't know at that time it was so effective, but I could have stuck to my own idea and stayed in periocular chemotherapy, but we realized in the group that intra-arterial chemotherapy was going to be better. And what we had to leave all our work we did in periocular chemotherapy and went back again to New York, sent more people to train, and came back and set up a lab for intra-arterial chemotherapy. And here is what you could see here, first animal model of intra-arterial chemotherapy, first animal model in the world. So we published those observations. Intra-arterial chemotherapy we were the first center in Latin America, I think one of the 5th in the world. And we saved a lot of eyes, a lot of lives. And that was really a very wise decision. Even though I was wrong, it was not wrong, but I was working on the wrong path. This was the right path. But you have to be humble then to say, okay, this is much better. Let's take that and let's go in that direction. And then also this in the third column that you see here is that these were the phases of our lab. We had no lab until I took that decision that I showed you. So we started with the pharmacokinetics of ocular chemotherapy. Then we went to more in the genomics area. We discovered a biomarker. Then we did the minimal disseminated disease studies in retinoblastoma. Then we set up this model that I mentioned for intra-arterial chemotherapy. We did some devices as well for for sustained release of chemotherapy. And then we started the current era of genomics. We published in association with the French group in Institut Curie seminal study 2 weeks ago that was also very important for our group to learn from genomics, to train people in bioinformatics, for example, have our own animal models with ourselves, from our patients that also we learn in Sant Joan de Déu in Barcelona. And here it is also another of my frustration, which was me and a few others had the idea of having an app for the cell phone to detect leukocoria. And I had the father of one of my patients was is an engineer and was working on that. We created some preliminary work that could really be done. We presented to a series of grants, and we never won any grant about that. And then another group did it, and we lost that opportunity, perhaps. And that was kind of frustrating. Some things don't happen. Even sometimes you have a good idea, but sometimes it's not. You are not so strong to convince the regulators, the people that give the grants, etc., that it is important. And that is also something that you should work on. You have to fight for the cause and try to convince people that your research is really important. And then I told you that I was extremely focused. So one of the advices I got from my hospital was not to do just retinoblastoma. Because we had such a large group, a lot of people, genomics, pharmacology, animal models, etc. So they say, why don't you try to have more in other topics, in other diseases? So this is also something that was brought to me from Gabriel Mato, my mentor. I was looking at a team for doing GD2 lab for diagnosis of minimally disseminated disease. And he knew someone that was working in gangliosides. He could not remember if it was GD2 or another ganglioside. And then I met this guy here, he's called Daniel Alonso, who his team was working in another ganglioside. We had a coffee in the same place where I had the picture. And we said, oh, yeah, but I work in another ganglioside. That would be a lot of work for me to change and put another lab, but are you interested in the one I have? So we checked. It was really great. Yeah, he was working at GM, N-glycosylated GM3. It was useful for retinoblastoma as well, but mostly for neuroblastoma. And that started a collaboration that is still running today. From that day, when you have a coffee, 2007, to the next day when my other mentor, Dr. Davila, we checked in the pathology, the antigen was there. Then we had the drug. Then we had the phase 1, and now we completed the phase 2. That was done exactly 1 month ago. So we went to identify this medical need. That's again the flexibility. I could have said to that guy, no, I'm interested only in GD2 because I'm interested in retinoblastoma. But he had a really great target there, and you have to be flexible in understanding that you could go and check if this could fit to your model. So you have to not to have to be so close in your interest. And also that started another era in our hospital for public-private partnership, because there was a drug company, a local drug company that owned the drug against that that molecule. So that was also very important, very interesting in my career life. I learned a lot from them. I learned how to go from an idea to a clinical trial. And that was really, really a great opportunity. So in summary, I could say at that time, that was my research model, which was not different from many others, but was quite particular in my country. We have a research group in the middle that was supported by hospital resources. Most of us were paid by the hospital. Our salaries were paid. We have NGO support. We have foundations locally that were supportive to our work. We have international support, and we have the academic support. So the academic support was in Argentina. We have some grants that are given by governmental agencies. So we had a variety of sources of support. And that was something that was probably a virtue of my group. But then, as you're going to see in a minute, that was something that could not survive our model. And then it came the second big decision about 5 years ago, where the hospital, at that time, the hospital where I worked, wanted to have that that model as expanding to other diseases and other groups. And that was, you can guess, because I was here when I started, and then it was there when that happened. So it took a lot of effort to me. I had to start not paying too much attention to my group, because I had to open that for other groups that were probably, most of them were not of pediatric oncology, they were other researchers in the same hospital. So the expansion of the model was feasible only with strong institutional support. Then a couple of years ago, that support was not longer available, and the hospital took another direction. So the way I worked with our group worked with such a strong multidisciplinary teams and functional support. So that was not so easy at that given time. So especially in public institutions, the governmental institutions, sometimes it's difficult because the hospitals are big, the paperwork you need to do is a lot, and sometimes it's easy, and it's not easy to show the way you are working, and sometimes that limited, in my occasion, in my personal experience, it limited my the growth and expansion of the model. And perhaps this is not suitable for other diseases. We in cancer, perhaps it's easier because we have a topic that is of interest to the public. So it's I wouldn't say it's easy to get funding, but it's easier than in other diseases. So that created a lot of differences between some groups and the other ones in terms of funding. And that was also something that was not good as the expansion of our model. And when the institution leadership changed, sometimes they have another goals, and what you're doing is not their goal, and you need a lot of support to be able to go on with your research. So let me share with you some final thoughts. I just would like to. Well, I didn't tell you the end of the story. The end of the story is that I moved from to another institution in another country. Now I work, as I mentioned in the beginning, to Uruguay, and we are in the new phase of putting that what I learned from the implementation of a research group, a basic and translational research group with a lot of institutional support in another institution in Uruguay. So this is a way of life. This is not a job. I always say the same to my fellow. It's, as I showed you repeatedly, it is very important to be surrounded by people smarter than you, and always during the whole time of your career, you have a lot to learn from many people, and I'm very happy that was that in my life. And you probably in the very early beginning where you have to pay attention, as I mentioned before, to try to work with your people to like most. Sometimes, as I decided to go for pediatric oncology, was because of the people and the topic, but the people. So probably that is also very important because, as I said, it's a way of life, it's not a job. So you deal with people all the time, and trying to avoid toxic settings is something very important in your happiness and in your productiveness. And also you have to be very patient. I always said reviewers are usually correct. You have, as I showed you, it is not a straight line. You go back, you go forth. It's a marathon. So you have to be very patient, and with publication, with grants, with promotions, they take longer than you wanted always. And you have to, I learned a lot from different views on other disciplines. That was very important. As I mentioned, I worked with ophthalmologists, with biologists, with pharmacists, and seeing the problem with their perspective, I think, was one of the most enjoyable things in my career. And learning from the different views, hearing what the interventional radiologist want to tell you, it is, or for example, or the bioinformatician wants to tell you, and learning from that, I think this is really fascinating. And that was, I think, the greatest experience of all. And as we discussed, be open to new possibilities. I think playing 50-50 fox and hedgehog, probably you know the story of the fox and the hedgehog. The fox jumps, goes many places, knows different things, works usually alone, and the hedgehog knows just one thing. It's just put into him or his or herself and resist what's happening around. So you have to probably find a combination of how much fox and how much hedgehog you are. And also, as I mentioned in the last part, in the early parts as well, you have to align with the institution mission. You have to go the same way of your institution. If at some time during your career, those ways are no longer parallel, and this is not making you happy, sometimes you have to change from one institution to another, and that is healthy. That is something that will make you happy, because, as I said, this is a way of life also, and not a job. And last but not least, you have to read and read and read. If you don't like to read and write, but especially read, this is probably, you're in the wrong venue. You probably need to do something else and not research. Just to thank all the people. Here you will see my mentors, my mentees, my fellows, my friends in many times, secretaries, everyone, or probably almost everyone that worked with me along this journey is here. Parents of children as well. Again, also a nice tradition. I always cooked for my fellows. This is paella. This is Spanish tortilla with jaume mora in Barcelona. So once every month, I try to cook once a month for them, and we had a great time. I had a lot of fun. And last, I'd like to acknowledge the support from my family. That was really, as I said, this is a way of life. This is your family way of life as well. And they are always extremely supported and loved. So thank you very much. And I'd love to share with you more experiences and answer any questions you may have.